All right, I'm going to mute you both and begin. Once I get my tech up. Alrighty. Hi, everybody. This is Sarah. I am the marketing and sales director at Deep Vellum Publishing. I am very excited to welcome you to another virtual event that we are doing this season. This is our second book launch event that we're doing virtual, so it's a little bit new, but I'm really thrilled to welcome a whole crew here for Mike Soto's A Grave is Given to Suffer. So first, before we get started completely, I want to give you all a little bit of information about the book. This is a multimedia celebration of A Grave is Given to Suffer, which is a narco-acid Western told in a series of interlinked poems. It's an incredible book that we published on July 28th. Mike Soto was raised in East Dallas, and we are so thrilled to have him as a part of our world as Deep Vellum. We've done a chapbook by him called Dallas Spleen, which came out last year. And now we have A Grave is Given Suffer from him as well. He received his MFA from Sarah Lawrence and was awarded the James Merrill Poetry Fellowship by the Vermont Studio Center in 2019. This is his debut collection of poetry. So he'll be joined by a couple of other people as we move forward through the evening. First of all, I want to mention his co-performer, Zach Galindo, who is the executive director of Lake Highlands School of Music. He played guitar and toured for 11 years with an alt-country band, Rodney Parker and 50 Pacer Award. He attended Berklee College of Music and received an BA in music from the University of North Texas. Before the pandemic, he played jazz in the De Facto Trio, and now we're really thrilled because he is playing for us with Mike Soto for this launch celebration. After this performance, there will be a Q&A with translator Janet Hendrickson, who we're also thrilled to have on the Zoom tonight and on Facebook tonight. Janet Hendrickson's experimental translation of a 1611 dictionary was published by New Directions, was longlisted for the 2020 Penn Award for Poetry and Translation. She is also the translator of The Future Is Not Ours, which is a recent anthology of Latin American fiction. And she holds an MFA in nonfiction writing from the University of Iowa and a PhD in romance studies from Cornell. We're so thrilled to have all of these folks in Dallas with us right now. So while we can't all be in person together sharing this video with you, we can be across the city from each other in our homes, kind of celebrating virtually and making of it what we can. So what we're going to start with this evening is this performance by Zach and Mike. While you're watching, if you have any questions, we'll have time for those at the end. So go ahead and post your questions in the comments of this Facebook video, and we will be able to reserve time for that at the conclusion of our event. So a lot of words from me. Thank you so much for being here. If you're in the moment watching, thank you for being a participant and being a viewer. And if you're watching later on YouTube, thank you for following up and finding this video with us. Now I am thrilled to welcome, who I will ask to unmute really quickly, Mike and Zach. Are y'all able to, let's see. Thank you, I appreciate it. Super, and I will kneel. Excellent, super. I will mute myself.
Sands outside Sumidero. I buried my first toy, a picture of my mother. I said goodbye to my father, who left determined to across the wall, commonly known as the brow of God. After that, the horizon I gazed at for a grip on what to do now, next, for the rest of my life, gave me nothing. All I could do was sit, duck my head into the darkness with my held knees for what seemed like hours. Enough to fall half asleep and dream a section of the wall shadow came over and clocked the hat into place on my head. I woke and looked up, but the monolith was gone. I stood and scanned the horizon, spotted a horse and a rider. That's when I knew the dream was real. As fast as I could, I ran in their direction. The rider, a man in a snakeskin vest, slowed down and told me, "Topito, your hat is all black, so the brim and the shadow it casts will always be confused. Now the way to go unseen is yours, and the inward journey possible. Now you start seeing how the flesh gets tamed." Topito's fate. The wind of that dream lasted a horizon of years in my stomach, leaving a lone tree bent in the gesture of listening. That's why my hand flickered like a dove key on an accordion in my sleep. Why the moon of that dream took enough steps into reality, reached the door, and arrived at breakfast, making my first bird too heavy to fly from the table, tipping over the sunlit glass of water instead. Those broken pieces on the floor of the coins that bought me a block of ice. For years, gum frozen at its center, had my name engraved on its handle. Missing swallows list. Sunlight we caught like water in our palms, splashing signals to each other from pocket mirrors. Where did it go? One beat hello, two beats I'll be naked and waiting. Kisses that kept our lips burning. The night a pair of swings waited in the weather of sparkling star. The house no one owned or looked at. Even in the deepest dark, the unleashed laughter. Getting home to raise the window and sleep to wind shampooing the heads of trees. The sex invented for the occasion of a lake. Winded flames leap into the lap of those branches. Winded neighborhoods disappear like people inside imposters. We once knew battles worth coming out alive from, roosters that picked for seeds in our footsteps. Now we can't know what made that go missing, what sleep even us out. The deer that stared into our bedrooms dissolved into what night? Answered whose call behind the next trees that never let them come back. Even on nights of recent rain, oil-stained streets where we watched ourselves walk upside down for hours. Even in broad daylight, the river of shadows cast down, wings that swept the daydream away from our hearts. Those birds found a hole in the sky where, and what about the flashing scales of fish we once found startled in the dark, like coins trying to flip themselves back into water? Consuelo in the poppy fields, sparked on the steep terrain of the town just west of Sumidero. Fields, poppies, where lentils thrive. Some still remember the black smoke, how quickly after the men, torches in their hands and bandanas over their noses left the ultraviolet flowers blanketed hillsides. The most lucrative drug market the world has ever known raged into existence just north of the border. Cartels responded to the soaring demand with exponential growth. One field became 7. Experienced workers became supervisors, putting the word out, posting flyers, and people built low to the ground. Teenagers, boys enough to come on as security, transformed the fortune of their families instantly after generations of humble earnings. Vow never to return to a life of having nothing, always a live wire. During collecting season, full moon on a clear night, I bathe the fields in the pool of light that makes milk from the scored pods come. Consuelo grew up here, claims on such occasions, hummingbirds, the nocturnal breed, arrive and become ecstatic, sucking on pods left oozing, slow down from their hyper-awareness to perch on the rocks in their delirium. Iridescence of their feathers, a green rarely seen. Hourglass with bat wings. With boots we offer to landmark the sky, tossed up, caught by the wire as a handcuffed pair of notes, as bats that would sing upside down had we not cut out their tongues to make cradles for slingshots. Under the barking of the brightest star, we perfected ourselves for looking back, left love like cards, the highest hand, face down on the table, and set out with ambitions to fail as many times as necessary, find ourselves barefoot on the other side of the brides, yellowing the grasp of our youth. Aspirations to be the ones staggering into the porch light of a stranger who would give us 3 months' work of timbering pine. Paid a cyber cafe attendant with no face, a pool hustler, a pastel blue prostitute, finally found the coyote who led us to a tunnel that connects a payphone in a field of maize to a parking lot surrounded by desert in every direction. By walking 3 days under the clean stare, the sun took to be shining upside down. By finding mirrors, water could never drink. Sowing the best years of our lives to death and turned them into a pair of songs on a jukebox. We got the desperate money we needed, paid the best lookout along the wall, 12-year-old with the hair of a caterpillar, who knew when shifts ended, which guards like to nap.
Awesome. Excellent.
First time I saw death, her dress was tripwire. Found a man slumped under the branches of a Versace, held hostage by the heat to its shade. His hand over the wound in his stomach with the lid that was throttled. He didn't ask for help or water. He looked up, gave me the limp bird, his handshake, whispered for me to sit down next to him so I could see what he was seeing. In the distance, a city underwater, a skinny lady severing a silver thread with her side. A dung beetle climbed out of the dead man's mouth. He let his last breath sail, and it was the horn kind we used to find belly up after they battered their bodies against the wall of our house. Even if you won't hear me out, plucked it from its lips, did what we did back then, leashed its horn with twine. In the end, that was the spark that led me to a tunnel, lit by fluorescent miles of thought, shrines to my renovated, couched into its walls, and an orange Datsun waiting where an actual road began. Got out of the Datsun, found myself at the bottom of a day lit up by the barking dogs that appeared on the roofs of every house. Tricksters came out of corners selling hits they called Berrogos. The more I kept going, the deeper into the noise I got. A woman showed me the dense dead tattoo on her inner thighs, and I knew I was in Sumidero. By dusk, that was me, soaring upside down, spun in the sky from a pole, wearing the wings of an eagle. And only that woman with eyes the color black if it bled could talk me down. Next life. The deck of cards we've been afraid to part, the unlit side of our lives, sits there holding down a table next to a glass of water the sunlight had poured. The curandero we put out visiting for years, refusing bright distance between reason and belief, avoiding the drive from several deserts away to the noiseless town where he lives, dreading the house where he'll point out the pain we've cradled like wet firewood, where he'll tell us whose jealousy hasn't let the tall grass sway in our sleep, not wanting to be in the room where we'll describe the flowerwood we must steal, tell us whose picture we must bury in its place, to let the past know it's been uprooted. But the time comes to rig the cutlass prunes of our fathers, arrive where every brown-eyed denizen starts giving us directions before we even say his name. Time comes to knock on the door, enter that tunnel, and his teenage son's answer, invite us to sit in the patio while they fix the stereo of a black Mazda to the chopped, screwed music we once hated to the point of love. When the curandero finally appears, he blots out the imposing figure we wanted him to be. Hoodie sweater, baseball cap that sends his ears out like a bat. Smaller and younger and more clean shaven. Before we change our minds, we find ourselves ducked into a room lit by the deck and a glass of water some could have poured. We sit down, try to be clever, imparting only one card off the top, but he doesn't even notice. Spreads the cards on the table before we choose, and little man turns them, windows that let out the wind. Instructions, or swells, yes. Tear a window on the pomegranate's flesh. Smell the bright blood of its seeds. Rested on the shoulder of the grave. Let that wound be a light left on. Place it in the manner that best punctuates the still life. Gravestone, grave flowers, grave moss and lichen, grind over 3-year fall. Walk the path away. Think of the garden you inherit if you turn back. Patina on petals, cobweb branches, foliage veiled with time lost. Red for the dismantled weight of your thoughts. Red for promises of bloodshed on billboards lit up and for once unkept. Red for the tablecloth snatched out perfectly from underneath that supper. Take the memory of that scent, lock it in a drawer whose key you have to swallow. With you, there are moments sunlight never touches with its fingertips. With you, fire damp flowers that sway on the seafloor. With you, this need to arrive at a blown curtain, into the photo booth and let it give you strip your bill face to place in the corner of the vanity. Dressing up a drug lord, to wake and wind up standing in the same room, hands held together, formed a locket for his picture, side by side, facing a corpse that moved washed and famous on the table. To know that a pair of coins and a pound of marigolds, Sunday clothes and comb, blowing atop the orange tin. We were locked in with an obvious order. Cornucopia in a coffin, garlands, lacquered crosses, spur blade of a rooster, pomegranates still ripening, bottles of añejo, the ecstatic kind. Everything needed to improvise Consuelo's first time at mine. Shears and shapers, shadow kits and tweezers, needle theaters with jewelry. Many would say, too young, but we knew sand as the sound of trying to feed the dead man's arms to his sleeves. So we used the scissors to bottom out his clothes. Consuelo wrapped the tie around her neck first, imagined its preference. I walked every button through its eyelids, like a waiter carrying a platter up to the last flight, while we closed the wings of his collar and served the freshly minted knot to his Adam's apple. By then he knew, laying one coin heads and the other tails on the scales of his eyelids, to keep them bright through the darkness between the thighs of death, forever watching supper arrive on the table. Hundreds of hired mourners outside, restless trombones and shovels, pallbearers pacing and what must be his widow beside the flute horns. Mother with her granddaughters probably, tired of the sun, ex-lovers in their blacks. Flowers tucked like dawn around his shoulders, lapis rosary lighting the fingers of his left hand, and cradled under his right arm, a gold-plated buttermilk Chico. Only then did we feel bold enough to knock from the inside out and lie. We were happy with our work, and yes, we were done. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is Zach Galindo. I'm Mike Soto. Topitos, yes. The window cracks open. An ant travels the sunny side with an egg. And already a song at my heels is a trumpet snickering at death. I guess played simply, resembling a blind man's cane, the light tapping into the belly of a knife. Flash that agrees with the plump down clicks and crown the bottom of the black, triggering stove heat to rise with the tight-knit noise of mobs in the street. Demands for me to give up raising that song as my child, getting louder. To declare every minute spent convincing that flash to be a flame we could carry, that in turn would carry us for at least a few minutes past the border into an afterlife like parking lots and payphones. Beyond the wall, calmly known as the cloud of God as a fable. After hours, we could have held water and didn't. After moments flickered like moths, but never frenzied with light. After a day of pouring myself tea, death's immaculate silk kettle, with everyone standing carefully back, I walked out. The kiss from that morning blazed in my palm, held like the last match in the book, handled like a fledgling fallen from the branches of the zeitgeist. Passing eyes that stopped everything to accuse me of petty arson, senseless blasphemy, felony sex, passing the supremely unchosen, stairs that stood unlit in doorways, incremental wives, with only a few others who kicked ant piles to join me. It led us to an altar, the dance of dead scene in miniature, tied of skeletons on emaciated horses, galloping towards small, astonished figures. And by the time it took us to the altar, with the Virgin Mary seated next to something worthwhile, arranged as if not caring who sees them at the same table. We were 15 with one flame between us, down to just me again, an improvised dock, where that hiss was made. And the sound of the room shadows and the king's twisting signaled ferry boat coming.
Thank you so much, Mike and Zach, for that performance. It's excellent to hear poetry read out loud to begin with, especially during quarantine, when I think a lot of us are viewing reading as such a solo activity, even more so than normal. But in addition, with a musical accompaniment, it just takes it to a whole nother level. And I'm so grateful y'all are able to do this. So thank you very, very much. now we're going to turn it over to Mike and Janet, who will be in conversation about A Grave is Given Supper. I just want to quickly reiterate, don't forget that you're welcome to type your questions in the chat under this video, and we will make sure that they are answered at the end of this event. We'll make plenty of time to answer y'all's questions. So I'm going to disappear again and welcome Janet and Mike onto the screen. Thanks to y'all so much.
Hi, that was so beautiful. Thank you, both of you. That was just such it was just such a fabulous performance. And just to add to what Sarah, I mean, my previous experience was reading this book silently. And so I feel like it took my reading and added another dimension to my experience of the book. So anyway, I guess maybe just to start, Mike, if you could talk a little bit just about the genesis of this book, how it came to be, your process, and maybe just the path from its beginnings to this particular incarnation of it this evening.
Sure. Just like the beginning of it's sort of just like a vague sort of reaction to, just the drug violence that it's sort of taking shape in Mexico, in particular in my family's home state, Michoacan, which is literally where the sort of like the peak of what we know as a drug war in Mexico started. Shortly after Felipe Calderon took office, he sent military troops into Michoacan to confront the drug cartels. And that's sort of where you saw sort of the really sadistic side of it, where innocent bystanders were fair game. And, just like towns in Michoacan were just sort of like held hostage, family members living in fear. Going back there was, it's really dangerous, which we did anyway, but it was just, you're always on edge. So I was sort of like feeling far away. I was living in New York at the time. And that's really how I just started out. I felt like I just needed to respond in some way for myself. And sort of that's how I sort of started accumulating like content and subject matter.
So I guess when you talk about that, I mean, several things really strike me reading this book, both as a collection and as sort of a narrative whole. And I mean, one of them is that it's very narrative and it's very topical. And on the other hand, it's like each poem has its own sort of lyric unity to it. And so I don't know if it's sort of a broad question and it could draw on a lot of things, but can you talk a little bit about the tension between some of the more, I don't even know if I want to call them documentary, but maybe you can get to that in a second, but the more, I guess, realist aspects of this collection and its relationship to perhaps the more, what we might call poetic or the more surrealist or the more symbolic and lyric aspects of it.
Yeah, I'll try to sort of get at your question. If I don't, you can just tell me if I'm missing something. But yeah, I mean, I think they're real, say, facts and numbers in the book, and a lot of it is based on real occurrences. Like there's a poem that begins the second part where 68 bodies are found without, just pretty much torsos. And that's an actual thing that happened. But, the state number was always 43 bodies were missing, but the official, but what people know it to be is more 68. The disappearance of the students in Ayotzinapa, that's in Fue el Estado. That's the sort of the rallying cry to bring justice to the murder of those students was Fue el Estado. So that's I believe the third poem in the book. And the numbers are like, say, 3,700 murders in 1 year. That was what Ciudad Juarez experienced in 1 year. So I felt just free to include real things in a sort of surreal context. And I guess the surreal aspect of the book, I sort of felt like that was appropriate because to me that was the sort of climate, sort of like this climate of terror that the drug war created. It was surreal in a way, but it was also really visceral. And I felt like that was an appropriate way to sort of get at the culture of violence. And I really wanted to hit that sort of bottom level of, I guess, of like horror, but also sort of like disjointed morality, disjointed ambitions, you know, just like, I wanted to create that atmosphere. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, you know, with this question, I was thinking about, and it's maybe more of a statement than a question, but, you know, I was thinking about the places where, you know, like the traditions where you see this work coming from, but also, you know, where you see it acting, where you see it going. And I don't know if you feel like commenting on that, but I mean, I have some other follow-up questions too, so you tell me. Go ahead.
Yeah, like influences that influenced me and that I really found just like useful to me in terms of writing it. I mean, I think like a lot of the literature of the beginning of the 20th century, I feel like I'm just constantly going back to Gertrude Stein, to the surrealists at the inception, and then sort of like skipping all the way to like 1970 and Frank Stanford, and but also, you know, like the Latin American tradition, you know, from Juan Rulfo to Cortázar to Clarice Lispector, Maroso di Giorgio, all those traditions sort of inform me. So I'm sort of all over the place and across time, but I feel like those sort of three areas were the areas in terms of like literature that really like moved me and sort of like found useful in writing the book too.
That makes a lot of sense reading it. Yeah, that I was able to sort of place it in just this really hemispheric, like diverse hemispheric body of literature that spans these questions of death and violence and many other things that your work is directly engaging with in this really contemporary way. I mean, speaking of influences, I guess one of the more obvious ones, especially given the cover copy, is that cinematographic. It's cinematographic scope, right? The fact that you cite this movie El Topo, and you know, when I think about this term cinematographic, I wonder, you know, often we weight the visual when we think of that. So maybe you can talk about the aspects of visuality, both in the poems and in, I'll just hold up my copy of the book since I'm sitting closer. It's got these really gorgeous, gorgeous prints in here that add something to the narrative. And then, so I'm gonna give you another statement question and see what you want to do with it. But you know, we have this idea too of cinema as being a moving picture, right? So we have this narrative movement, this idea of moving picture as montage, which I think maybe has to do with the lyric juxtaposition in your work. And then something that also incorporates sound, which happens within the poems and which happens in this performance. So can you just talk about cinema, poetry, what these things mean to you in conjunction here?
Yeah, well, that's like a good follow-up question because I feel like all those literary traditions definitely informed me and influenced me a lot, but I probably, you know, cinema is also a huge influence. You know, I think like not only Jodorowsky, I mean, for him it was just like El Topo, but you know, like the films of like Andrei Tarkovsky and I don't know, all of last century. I think actually like this film is probably like the greatest art of the last century. You know, so I drew a lot from you know just like Robert Bresson. I feel like is endless to me. I can just always go back and find stuff there. So I sort of wrote this book when I knew I was sort of like writing it as a narrative. sort of in lineage with El Topo, I sort of pictured the sections sort of being these fade-ins and fade-outs. And I knew I wanted to at least section the poems with a blank page. And I didn't know that, you know, Deep Vellum was going to be, you know, with me in terms of like integrating like the interlude art. So for me, this was like a lot more than I could hope for. I mean, I think it's really amazing. It really took what I had in mind totally to the next level. And I mean, that includes all of Daniel Gonzalez's art. I think like, you know, I had an idea, but he had the hand sort of like elevate everything that I had in my head. And I think like for me, so where this came from was there's a Julio Cortázar book, La Autopista del Sur, that has a painting by, I think it's Julio Galan, called Tanje, Tanje, Tanje. And in that painting is a table with like the ocean in the back, and there's like a surreal narrative going on, you know, like taking place on it. So I sort of like took that idea and felt like, well, that would be really cool if I could incorporate that in my book. The title of my book is called The Grave is Given Supper. So setting a table and the syntax and grammar of like arranging things on the table came like really just central to the book. So you know, I hope it's pretty obvious. This is like a tablecloth, and all the things are taking place on a table. But it becomes this place where it just sort of like accumulates images or accumulates meaning by addition or subtraction. So yeah, I think like originally I had a sort of a fade in and fade out sort of sequence in between the poems, but this is just like, you know, so much better. And I think in terms of, did you ask about sound? Remind me.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought of that too, because I mean, like we prioritize the image, I think, when we talk about cinema, and you incorporated sound so beautifully into your performance of the book. And so I thought I would just add that onto the question as well. Like, where is sound potentially playing into this sort of idea of the arc of the book or this particular performance? And I don't know, maybe Zach wants to swing around and address that as well.
Okay. Well, I think for me, I mean, sound is obviously like really important to me, but I think like maybe Zach can talk a little bit about this. I mean, I feel like the tradition of cinema that this book is in or tries to be in is the Western, in particular like anti-Western. So I feel like, you know, like there's so many Westerns that incorporate amazing sound, in particular like the movies of Sergio Leone. You know, Ennio Morricone passed away this year, and he's just like a master. I feel like you can hear his music to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, and instantly you're somewhere. You don't know. If you've never seen the movie, it still takes you somewhere. So I feel like having this book sort of, you know, aligned in that tradition, it was sort of like, I don't know, it seemed kind of like really immediate. I think me and Zach got together only a few times, and you know, he was able to create like really great sound ideas right away.
Yeah, you know, Morricone is a great example of just, you know, taking you there to the place immediately, just very almost aggressively, and so Mike and I just wanted to come up with a few basic structural, like skeleton-like ideas that were looped, and then the idea of improvisation has always been important to me, and it's come naturally to me. I feel comfortable doing it, and so I wanted to take the basic loops, the skeletons, and then just be able to play sort of what I'm feeling with the words over them, and you know, with this type of poetry, I was going for something very angular, sort of cacophonous, and you know, at times textural, but it was fantastic opportunity for it to improvise just based on the
language. I'm going to take that as a transition or a permission, since your comments about language, to ask one last question of mine. And then we have a couple of questions from the audience that I want to pass on. But Mike, I know that you also work in translation as well as are working in some sense across language in this book. And so I just wanted to ask you, what would these poems look like in Spanish, and what would that mean?
You asked a hard question. There is...
I know, but I want to hear your answer.
There will be I think sooner or later there's going to be a Spanish translation of it. I don't know if I'll do it. But I think what's interesting for me is a lot of these poems did start in Spanish, but I felt like since I knew the manuscript of the book was going to be in English, I didn't see them through all the way to the end, because I felt like, well, I also want to like make good use of my time. So I think like this book is obviously a book that has its foot in both worlds. Spanish was my first language, but that's also a little deceptive, because I think it's also I sort of like grew up with both almost simultaneously. But I think like I don't have, I would say, poetic fluency in Spanish, but I think I could get there if I tried, but I just don't have enough practice. And I think like this book, I think, you know, people like friends in Mexico obviously know that I write as a norteño, you know, like someone who's fluent in Spanish, but, you know, like it's pretty obvious right away that I didn't grow up completely in Mexico, that I'm sort of like raised here, Americanized, whatever you want to say. But I think that's also appropriate for the border. So I think there's this thing, I tried to describe this to you earlier, there's a thing where I'm telling the story standing on this side of the border, and to translate it, if I were to do it or to oversee doing it, I would just have to step to the Mexican side of the border. But they're both sort of in the same area. So I think it would be a really challenging thing to do. I have started translating a few of the poems. And yeah, some of the translations are really difficult to find the right words. So yeah, I think that's about as much as I can wrap my head around the translation right now. Is that okay, answer?
That's a great answer. No, I feel like translation, talking about it and doing it can be two very, very different things. And I feel like maybe it's the same with writing. That sort of, you know, like creating and analyzing are two different processes, as the poster I have hanging over my desk right now states. And so I think, but I really liked what you were saying about simultaneity. And I think that's an interesting, like the simultaneity of language, or the simultaneity of learning language, right? Of having two first languages, which, you know, isn't at all uncommon. And the way that the sort of separation between the two is as perhaps artificial as this national border, right? Which your poems are inhabiting as the sort of really more continuous and singular space. And so, yeah, that was a beautiful answer. Thank you. I would love to hear more about that, but I do want to make sure we get time for some questions from the audience. So first of all, just to let you know, we have some positive emoji coming your way, fire and heart. So for both of you guys. I have a question from Lisa Davidson. Mike, were you influenced by the magical realism genre, so prevalent in Latin American literature?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I think you, being Latino, Latinx, I think if you want to be a writer, you have to go through the so-called magical realism school. So an interesting story was that, I don't know, I think I was around, it was in my teenage years, probably like 16 or so. I was in a state where I sort of had lost my Spanish and, really wasn't able to communicate, like say with my family, sort of in a fluent way anymore. Because I was just sort of like, like in public schools, bilingualism is not encouraged. So I was affected by that. So interesting story about that is, we'd go to Mexico every year in Michoacan, and one year I just decided to start reading 100 Years of Solitude in Spanish, to sort of reclaim my Spanish in a way, which was probably like way too difficult a way to go through it, because I think like I also brought a dictionary and just sort of like created all this marginalia of like definitions of words that I didn't know. So I still have that copy of that book, and it's like littered with definitions. But I read it once through and defined every single word that I didn't know, and I read it again. And I think like, yeah, I got like a lot more fluent in literary Spanish that way. But yeah, I mean, I think like, I've certainly read all the, people that we consider like masters, like Borges is unavoidable, so is Cortázar. But, a lot of the writers that are sort of outside of that tradition are just as important to me. Like, Alejandro Jodorowsky is just endless. Marcel Di Giorgio is endless. There's so many, Javier Villarrutia from Mexico to me is a huge influence. So I think like, yeah, I mean, definitely love a lot of those writers, especially the ones that came before they were sort of tagged by the magical realism. I think like a little bit after that, it became sort of, like a tag or a category that writers sought to live up to. And then it got a little bit more conventional to me. But yes, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, I love the story about Garcia Marquez. It reminds me of this one time I was in Central America and I was reading Cortázar's Cronopios y Famas on a bus, and I didn't have a dictionary with me. And I just remember walking around the bus asking everyone what cronopio meant. And of course, it's an invented word and nobody could tell me. So there's a word I'll never forget. But I mean, what you're saying, yeah, your comments also just, I think it was Garcia Marquez who said that magical realism is actually just realism, right? Which goes back, I think, to some of your comments earlier about both the ways that surreality and realism intersect in very non-competing ways in this book. So
yeah,
go ahead.
The book is still amazing. It still resonates. He said he found the tone of 100 Years of Solitude just by listening to his grandmother and listening to her say all these fantastic things with this brick face. I mean, you can do that with anything. It's just like, you can literally say anything. It's just like, how do you make it into a believable reality? You can talk about the most fantastic things in the world. If you say it with a straight face and you add, real life concrete details to it, it's totally believable, and it has that magical realism element to it.
Completely. So I know we're running a little bit low on time here, but I have one last pair of questions from the audience, and they're related, so I'm going to combine them into one. Can you, first of all, talk just about your journey as a writer from where you began to publishing this book, A Grave is Given Supper, and going along with that question, are you working on any new projects now?
Okay, publishing. Well, I write pretty slow, and I think I started this book sort of vaguely around 2012, maybe. And I guess like publishing always eluded me. I would write the poems and hold on to them for a long time because that's just like my habit. And I guess, I don't know if this will answer the reader's, the question directly, but I think I held on to a lot of the poems, perfected them, and then sent them out little by little. And I think in talking to friends who were at that point just like a lot more, published a lot more than I had at the time, I asked them how often they sent stuff out. And it just totally shocked me because I thought like, I'm doing nothing. like I'm sending like 5 poems out to magazines like a month when they were sending 50 and had like 50 submissions out at a time. So I don't know, I think the numbers game is unfortunately something that you have to play. And you know, I think it's a good practice because I think like most of the times, you know, rejection is there and it's a part of the game, and it's a good practice to, I think, to be rejected at a high clip, because you know it sort of teaches you that, you know, the good stuff will eventually get through. But I guess when it came to this book, I had brought it to a point and I was sort of sending it out to contests, but honestly not that enthusiastic about winning. So I think I met Will Evans like a while back, and you know, I've sort of heard Deep Vellum, and you know, thought like, who's this publisher doing all this amazing stuff in my hometown of Dallas? So I was prepared after a couple of years of sending the manuscript out to pitch it to them as sort of a work, sort of in the realm of translation. That's how I wanted to pitch it, as a book having its foot in both worlds. And I think like they were already thinking about publishing English originals, so like timing was sort of like perfect for that.
It's beautiful to hear. And I think, I'm just going to throw out there that I think writing is completely on the same spectrum as translation. So way to make that happen. Or translation is a kind of writing. But I'm going to just, the other question from the audience is, what are you working on now? What's next?
Oh, okay. So I'm working on another book of, I guess it would be a mixture of poetry and prose, but it's collaboration with my long-term collaborator, Diego Enrique Flores. And actually, so this is one of his photographs. I can bring it closer. So anyway, that's the book that I'm sort of working on right now. So I can sort of describe it this way. We've both sort of been traveling the past decade in between Texas, Mexico, and New York. And we've lived together, we've traveled together, and you know, like his photography has always really inspired me. So we've always wanted to do a collaboration. So we're working on that now, and it's sort of in the realm of the crastic poetry or writing. But yeah, that's the next project, and I'm really excited about it. It's sort of like tracing that journey between those 3 places, Texas, Mexico, and New York, sort of like an exploration of identity and origins via his photographs. So it's sort of like a illuminated text, like via his photographs.
Wow, I love that idea. I'm excited to see another visual work. Sarah, do we have any more questions from the audience?
That is the last question from the audience. We have a couple comments saying thank you so much. So thanks to all 3 of you for being a part of this event and working to make sure that we can share this book in as many ways as possible, even though we're all working from our computers. I'm so grateful for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a reminder to everybody, Mike Soto's book, A Grave is Given Supper, is available through the Deep Vellum website at deepvellum.org. It's also available through your local independent bookstore. These are really hard times for our indie bookstores, and they keep us alive in many, many ways. So I really recommend calling up your local folks and ordering Mike Soto's book through them. I have a couple of other events to just shout out before we finish up the evening completely. Deep Vellum is working on a whole roster of events, virtual events for the fall going forward. Coming up, we're partnering with the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, and our author, Fozia Karimi, will be speaking with Micheline Marcom to present her book Above Us, the Milky Way, An Illuminated Alphabet. That occurs on September 24th. That's 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central. In addition, on the 30th, we'll be hosting another event in our Accessibility in the Literary Arts series, Writers on BIPOC and Disability Inclusion. I recommend hanging out for that. That's at 7 p.m. Central Time, because we have some folks on the West Coast for that one, so we're trying to make sure everybody can come in and it not be too late or too early for them. And last but not least, North Texas Giving Day is coming up on September 17th. And we are so excited to bring y'all a whole slew of books and events every single year and make it work no matter what the situation is. So if you feel inclined to support Deep Vellum and to continue supporting wonderful authors like Mike Soto and conversations like this one with Janet Hendrickson and performances like this one with Zach Galindo, etc., we would be so grateful if you would log on to our website and find details there to help support us in the coming year and beyond. That wraps up our evening, unless Mike or Janet or Zach, if y'all have any further questions. But that's the end of my spiel.
Thank you.
Awesome, excellent. Well, thank you so much to everybody on Facebook for tuning in. I will have us leave y'all now, but much appreciated. This event is being recorded and will be provided on YouTube and on our website shortly. So keep an eye out, rewatch to your heart's content, and have a wonderful evening.